Hey everybody, today we're going to take a look at the PC edition of Final Fantasy 15 released this March. Now, I do realize this pertains to a pretty small crowd because most people already have their opinion formed about Final Fantasy. They're the die-hard fans who will buy every release and think it's great. There are others that have been burned by previous games, so they're no longer interested. There is also the small fact that this was released for consoles in November 2016, so many gamers have completed the game and they're not exactly on the fence about whether or not to buy it. All that being said, I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about Final Fantasy, so let's jump right in. Hopefully this can still help inform somebody who comes across this title in a Steam sale, or somebody who just starts to hear the hype from other PC gamers. Final Fantasy 15 opens with a disclaimer that it's a game for fans and first-timers alike. That's a pretty ambitious goal, considering the first release was over 30 years ago and gaming has changed so much in that time. It's also a risky goal since there's a possibility of alienating your loyal fan base when trying to also please everybody else. But in my opinion, between the story, combat, and visuals, they actually pulled it off. The creators took the backdrop of Square Enix lore and filled it with modern characters and technology that makes it more accessible for new gamers. This feeling starts to fade almost immediately when you see four characters look fresh out of basically any anime you've ever seen, hopping in their luxury car and traveling for a wedding. These four people might make up the least interesting battle party of any Final Fantasy I can think of. Calling them one-dimensional would be a little generous. The main protagonist is an arrogant prince that is whining most of the time, unfortunately, another idea familiar to longtime fans. Everybody else in your party is an equally forgettable NPC with almost no backstory. If it's any indication how much Square Enix was struggling in this department, the bodyguard of your group, Gladio, has a special skill of walking. Prompto takes pictures that show off the graphics, Igneous cooks meals when he camps and provides incredible buffs for your party, Noctis fishes for ingredients, and Gladio walks. His skill does lead to finding strong healing items, but even though it's valuable, the lack of creativity is pretty disappointing. What makes it worse is that these skills are basically useless. You'll make a little bit of money, you'll get achievements and trophies, but they aren't needed for anything. Thankfully, the party members do provide dialogue to break up the long car rides, despite the fact that they use the same recycled 10 lines or so. Now, I may be a little tough on these characters, but they're such a disappointment when you put them up against the characters of the previous Final Fantasy games that you grew to love or hate. The real saving grace here is the variety they add in combat, but even that is lackluster in comparison because the same four characters all game. This is very different from the model of like Final Fantasy II, where you constantly had party members joining and leaving. They also shifted away from the system of Final Fantasy V and even Tactics, where you're always changing classes. While the party lacks any real variety, the combat itself is more varied than previous games. You're able to equip 4 different weapons at any time, and you can switch between easily, and each one has a distinct feel. One of these weapon slots can be used to equip magic that you can craft to fit your needs. Magic is essentially drawn in a way that's much less tedious than it was in Final Fantasy VIII, but then it's combined with items to increase potency while adding features like Curecast, Dualcast, and Venomcast. You also unlock a handful of different techniques for each party member that you can execute as the technique bar fills up in combat. There's also an Armiger attack that, while it isn't innovative by any means, it fills the role of a limit break that you build up and use in a situation where you need it. Now, admittedly, I wasn't impressed by combat at all during the tutorial, and even for the first couple chapters in the game, I felt like it was just teleporting and spamming the left mouse button. At first, it just feels like the easiest Dark Souls game of all time, where you'll learn the general rhythm of your enemies, you'll roll around dodging attacks until you have an opening to counter. Battle did become much more fluid as techniques are unlocked, but it always boils down to a lot of basic attacks for most fights. This kind of bothered me until I was brought back to some of my favorite Final Fantasy games, and realized that 90% of those battles are just auto attacks and limit breaks as well. The main difference here is that battle is much more fast paced and places a premium on positioning. Understanding that some people won't like this new style of combat, Square Enix did something brilliant. They added an option so people can still choose the old waiting turn-based style that they've been used to. If Square Enix continues to evolve and try new features while still allowing players to go back to proven methods, they'll be able to push the envelope without sacrificing the elements their fanbase already loves. One of the main elements that fans do love about these games and that have been a staple since Final Fantasy VII or maybe even earlier is the aesthetic. I don't have to tell any of you that the game has good graphics. You can see that for yourself even with the footage recorded on this older PC. Square Enix goes beyond that though by bringing back the style from Final Fantasy VI, VII, and VIII where they combine magic and medieval weaponry with highly advanced machinery. You'll regularly have soldiers dropping from airships with high-tech armor and guns, but they'll still occasionally attack you with daggers. They'll hop in your chocobo and you'll run along paved roads and vehicles. One of the design choices that I might be most pleased with is how they handled summons. I cannot stress enough how much I hated the way summoning was handled in Final Fantasy XIII, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone. You summon a god of fire to battle and basically drive him like a sports car. Some other installments were better, but they still struggle with scale in different ways, whether it's the size, damage, time, or significance. Summons in the past have looked like they were destroying a chunk of the world, and then you'd hit an enemy for about 900. Some dealt a lot of damage, but you'd probably miss a birthday in the time it took to complete the animation. There were times where it didn't even seem noteworthy that the member of your party found a way to essentially harness the power of the gods and use them as they saw fit. Final Fantasy XV treats summons the way they should. They're an essential part of the story, they're impressive in size, and deal significant damage. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions of games I should review, then please leave them below. And if any of you are working on indie games you'd like tested and reviewed, then please reach out to me because I'd love to help out. Thanks.